she stepped up as my wife and handled that. And there's been many times where I've been at my lowest, and she's always been the strongest to get me back up to like, get back out there. You gotta get back out there and do what you do. Don't worry about what's happening over here. I'm gonna handle that.
Not a press release, not a police statement, just the kind of quiet talk that moves through private rooms, industry dinners, and late-night conversations until the rumor stops feeling like a rumor and starts feeling like a storyline everyone already knows. And this storyline has one trigger that keeps getting repeated, one name that keeps pulling the whole narrative back to the same place. Shante brought us Snoop Dogg was not just angry with Sean Diddy Combs. In some corners, the way this has been framed is darker and more personal than anything the public ever saw on camera. People say it was not about money, not about power, not about a business dispute. It was about betrayal. More specifically, the idea that Shante's name got pulled into Diddy's private world in a way Snoop could not ignore. The theory that spread online was not presented as a single rumor that came and went. It was framed like a fuse, like the ultimate violation, like something that once it reached Snoop could only end one way. And once that framing took hold, the rest of the story almost wrote itself. The timeline became the backbone. In March of 2024, Homeland Security investigators raided properties connected to Diddy in Los Angeles and the Miami area. A moment that instantly made the situation feel real, not just internet noise. Then on September 16, 2024, Diddy was arrested. Those dates matter because they are the moments people use to build the theory around Snoop. By the time the arrest happened, the internet version of the story says Snoop and Diddy had already gone silent, that they had not spoken in months, that something had cracked long before the public ever noticed, and that the breaking point was not a headline. It was Shante, not a confession, not a taped conversation, not something proven on paper, just the kind of allegation that spreads fast because it attacks the most protected part of a public image. People claim Shante's name was tied to Diddy's after hours orbit in a way Snoop reportedly believed was unforgivable. And once people believe a marriage is under threat, they start looking for motives everywhere. They start asking how a federal case becomes so detailed. Because one thing about this situation is that people did not just talk about the scandal. They talked about the details. They talked about logistics. They talked about locations, coordination, and trails.
Same kind of extortion that we heard when Cassie took the stand and testified on that airplane ride back from France. Diddy said, "You don't do a freak off, I'm going to release one of the freak off videos that you are profiled in and humiliate you."
The kind of structure that makes outsiders
feel like someone on the inside must have helped connect dots. That is where the theory pivots towards Snoop. Their legacies are tied to the same golden era of hip-hop. Their circles overlapped for years, but sources close to both camps have long hinted that beneath the public smiles was quiet competition. Snoop built an empire around longevity, loyalty, and reinvention. Diddy thrived on control, spectacle, and being the loudest presence in the room. And when the legal storm around Diddy turned into a full public collapse, the rumor that refused to die was this: that investigators did not stumble into detail by accident. That someone with reach and memory, someone who had been close enough to the machine, quietly pointed them in the right direction, the right dates, the right doors, the right people. In the theory version, Snoop was not the headline. He was the compass. But to understand why Shante's name carries so much weight, you have to understand what she represents in Snoop's world and why the internet treats her like the one boundary nobody should cross. Because this story does not begin in a courtroom. It begins with a marriage. Shante Broadus was born and raised in Long Beach. She met Calvin Broadus before the world knew him as Snoop Dogg back when they were teenagers at Long Beach Polytechnic High School. They went to prom together. They built history before fame ever showed up. They married in June of 1997 and became one of the rare constants in an industry built on temptation and chaos. Shante was there during the death row era. She was there when the industry shifted and alliances broke. She was there through reinvention after reinvention as Snoop turned himself into a global brand, not just a rapper. In 2021, she officially became his manager, overseeing ventures across business, television, and brand deals. Snoop has described her as his final gut check, the last voice he listens to before signing anything. The person who can tell him no when everyone else says yes.
The turmoil and the stuff that I put her through in my journey on becoming successful, because I had no understanding of what I was doing her, how I was hurting her.
So, when people online say Shante's name got dragged into Diddy's orbit, it does not land like random gossip. It lands like an attack on the foundation. That is why the theory says Snoop did not need proof the way the internet demands proof. He needed something believable enough to treat as a threat. And once he treated it as a threat, the rest became strategy. Then another voice entered the story and kept poking the same wound, SUJ Knight. Early in 2024, Sugg was back in the conversation, taunting from behind bars through media and podcast talk. One moment kept getting repeated because it was designed to go viral. A photo, a line, a jab aimed right at Shante, right at the marriage, right at Snoop's pride. Some people wrote it off as desperate provocation. Others believed SUJ knew exactly which nerve to strike. Not because he cared about the truth, but because he cared about the reaction. And the reaction was not explosive. It was quiet. Behind the scenes, Snoop was described as withdrawn, focused, colder than usual, like someone who decided the smartest move was not to argue in public, like someone who was watching and measuring. Then the raids happened, then the arrest happened, and suddenly the rumor stream had a storyline that felt almost too clean. A quiet build, then a public collapse. The case itself became its own engine for speculation. Legal claims in the public conversation described private events in harsh language, painting a picture of control and coercion. Later, as the courtroom phase unfolded, testimony and legal argument fueled the idea that there was a hidden world behind the parties people used to joke about. The public kept circling one question: how did investigators get so specific? How did the story go from whispers to something that could be charged, argued, and sentenced? That is why the rumor machine keeps returning to the idea of structured information. People claimed the authorities had unusually detailed logistics, not just stories, not just vibes, but coordinated details that made the case feel organized. And in the court of public opinion, that kind of organization always points to an insider. So, the theory points to Snoop again. He had been around Diddy's world in the past, but the narrative says he kept his distance after 2020 when tensions began rising between entourages and the overlap started feeling risky. Those who know him say Snoop has always been protective of his image and protective of Shante's reputation. He survived his own storms, public noise, lawsuits that came and went.
When you get to be the age that we are and you get to become as successful as we are, you have to start doing some things that matter for the future.
Rumors that never fully died. But through all of it, Shante remained the anchor. By late 2023, she was managing major opportunities in expanding the Broadus brand. So in this theory, the idea that Shante's name got pulled into a scandal tied to Diddy's private world is not just disrespect. It is a line. And once a line like that is crossed, the theory says retaliation is not loud. It is calculated. People who believe the theory trace the retaliation to early 2024. After the Hawaii Post and the public taunts, Snoop's calm public posture looked like dismissal. But those around him claimed he was furious privately. Then within weeks, reports began circulating that federal investigators reached out to a major industry figure for information connected to Diddy's wider network. And when Diddy was arrested in September, that same figure, unnamed in filings and discussions, was described in a way that made the internet jump to one conclusion: a longtime West Coast artist turned entrepreneur. To those reading between the lines, the internet decided there was little doubt who it was meant to sound like. Still, the theory is not framed as revenge alone. It is framed as survival. Because the investigation touched dozens of celebrities, rumors swirled that evidence could include recognizable faces. In that context, people argue that cooperating would not only hurt a rival, it would protect your family from being dragged into the blast radius. And that brings the story right back to Shante again. Meanwhile, public sympathy leaned toward her. She had spent 27 years balancing loyalty and independence, often operating as the quiet force behind Snoop's empire.
Your wife's been by you for your whole
She's your high
career.
school
Your high
sweetheart.
school sweetheart. She is.
Never leave home without it.
Yeah, that's right. But how has she kind of taken you on this journey. Tell us about her.
I think my wife has been my best friend for a couple of reasons. One is that she always understood who I was and who I needed to become.
In interviews, Snoop has praised her as the good to my bad. But by early 2025, the internet started reading cracks into everything. Photos of Shante appearing alone at events. Captions that felt careful, almost coded, leaning into words like trust and truth. Not proof of anything, but enough for the internet to build another layer of narrative on top of the first. Then Sugar kept pushing the same pressure points, hinting, implying, daring people to question what they thought they knew about the Broadus home. Snoop's silence did the rest. While the court phase played out in New York, Snoop stayed away from cameras and refused to engage. He appeared publicly only once at a national broadcasting company event in March of 2025 and shut down questions about the case. To casual observers, it looked like distance. To people deep in the theory, it looked like control. Because prosecutors referenced third-party communications and corroborated accounts tied to private gatherings. And once people hear words like third-party communications, the next leap is automatic. Who supplied them?
A lot of times you have him with a younger female, and there's a power dynamic there. A more impressionable girl is easier to reel in. Consent is between the people that are engaging, and I wasn't there in these situations to understand the consent.
The internet version says a trusted veteran of the music industry was involved in the background and that investigators had unusually specific logistics. Again, not proven as a public fact in the way the internet claims it, but repeated enough that it became part of the narrative structure. Then the legal reality landed. In July of 2025, the verdict came down with a result that surprised a lot of people. Not guilty on the most extreme charges the public expected, but guilty on 2 transportation-related counts. In October of 2025, the sentence followed 50 months in prison and a major financial penalty. 4 months after arrest, Diddy was held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, which is why that name became part of the public vocabulary. But after sentencing, he was transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution at Fort Dix in New Jersey. That detail matters because Fort Dix is one of the biggest freshness signals in this story. If you keep saying Metropolitan Detention Center like it is the present, it sounds outdated. Fort Dix's makes it feel current. Fort Dix's tells the audience the timeline is alive, and as of early 2026, the appeal is still in motion. The next headlines may depend on what gets filed next, what gets argued next, and how fast the court moves. There is even a projected release date people keep repeating. May 8, 2028. A date that can shift, but a date that anchors the story in the present. Then another freshness detail dropped that made the public feel like the chessboard is still moving.
Tick tock, the clock is ticking on Diddy because on Friday he finds out what his sentence is going to be. But today he found out what prosecutors would like that sentence to be, and it is vastly different from what his attorneys have suggested to the judge. Prosecutors want him to do 11 years, just over 11 years.
In early 2026, Diddy's Beverly Hills home was reportedly pulled from the market again. And the moment that happened, people took it as proof that this story is not done, that moves are still happening behind the scenes, that the cleanup is still underway, that the circle is still making decisions. And while all of that is unfolding, the rumor machine keeps circling back to one thing, Shante. Because the story people keep telling is not just that Diddy fell, it is that Diddy fell for a reason, and that the reason connects to the Broadus marriage. Insiders whisper that Snoop is quietly satisfied, not publicly, not with a victory lap. In the way powerful people celebrate by staying calm while someone else collapses. But even in that version, the victory comes with a shadow. Because beneath the surface of the conviction sits another question people cannot stop asking. If Snoop's motive was protecting Shante, why are there whispers he may also have been protecting himself? Why do people insist there are names in the broader story that have not been revealed? Why do some former staffers claim a name closer to Snoop exists in the same orbit? As the narrative grows, it becomes larger than revenge. It becomes strategy. And that is where death row enters the picture. Snoop's acquisition of death row was framed publicly as a full-circle moment in hip-hop history. But Suge Knight did not treat it like a comeback story. From his prison cell, he treated it like theft. He has repeatedly framed the paperwork as illegitimate and claimed the deal was manipulated through corporate connections and legal maneuvering the public cannot see. And in hip-hop, a claim like that is never just noise. It is positioning. It is a warning. It is a way to shape what people believe before the documents ever matter. Critics noticed the optics. How quickly the acquisition was finalized. How fast the brand shifted into something cleaner, more mainstream, more family-friendly. For someone once accused of glorifying the streets, it looked like the ultimate redemption arc unless the redemption came at someone else's expense. That is why some observers connect the dots the way they do. They argue that distancing from Diddy, even quietly, even indirectly, would insulate the Broadus brand from contamination. That being seen on the safer side of the line, ally instead of target, would protect business networks and future deals. That is the kind of move people associate with chief executives, not rappers. But Snoop has blurred that line for years, and Shante sits in the center of that business identity. To outsiders, she looks like the loyal wife who got dragged into a scandal. But people who claim to know the broadest enterprise paint a more complex picture. As Snoop's manager, Shante is not a bystander. She is involved in key business moves and brand decisions. Insiders claim she pushed for safer positioning, cleaner lanes, and long-term stability. So when Diddy's allegations began to spread, some voices claimed Shante advised Snoop to distance himself legally and morally from anything connected to Combs's lifestyle. That phrasing feels loaded now because it raises the question people cannot stop asking.
Well, we all know that. I have to say, I'd never heard of this movie, and I have little kids. It was called Lightyear from 2022. I have absolutely no problem with the content. Like, he has a problem with the content in that movie. I have no problem at all. I thought that was presented as a brief history part of this movie. It wasn't a big part of the movie, and gay couples exist, and gay marriage is legal, and I found it all completely unproblematic. That said,
did she sense what was coming? Was she protecting her husband, or was she preparing the conditions for a takedown that would permanently separate the Broadus image from one of the most toxic names in modern entertainment? Some insiders push it further, alleging Shante played a role in gathering information, digital trails, communications, archives, anything that would help the family stay clean while the storm moved elsewhere. If true, it changes everything about how people interpret her role, not just a victim, a strategist. And that paradox, the alleged target becoming the quiet engine behind a public downfall, is exactly why this narrative refuses to die. Because the case against Diddy did not rest on one lawsuit or one witness. It was built through corroboration, timelines, and structured documentation. The kind of network that makes the public feel like more stories exist under the surface. That is how the theories are born. And Suge Knight knows it. That is why he keeps teasing bigger smoke. He warned that a tell-all book was on the way, claiming it would reveal who really sold out who. He hinted that Snoop's rise from death row artist to global businessman was built on a long line of deals with devils in suits. Given Sugi's reputation for bluster, most dismissed it as bitterness from behind bars. But then the tone shifted when talk began circulating about subpoenas reaching into old death row connections and financial documents. Suge's rant sounded less like random revenge and more like someone trying to get ahead of the story before it reaches him. If that book ever sees daylight, it could ignite another firestorm. One that forces the industry to reconsider the alliances that shaped modern hip-hop. And while Snoop fortified his empire, Diddy's world collapsed in public view. During sentencing in the fall of 2025, Diddy appeared drained. Reports described him admitting he got lost in excess, a line that captured the image people watched for decades: wealth, control, appetite, and the belief that consequences would always stay away. Prosecutors described influence and fear as tools that held an inner circle in place. Witnesses described private encounters that blurred the line between loyalty and exploitation. The conviction may have landed differently than the public expected, but the symbolic reversal was enormous. The mogul who once ruled over stars was now inside the system and later housed at Fort Dix in New Jersey. And the contrast is why the industry keeps whispering. Because while Diddy wakes up to steal and counts, Snoop wakes up to board meetings, family dinners, and a brand that stretches from music to television to gaming. It is a dramatic reversal that makes people ask whether Snoop outmaneuvered a system that once threatened to consume everyone around him, or whether he is simply another survivor who learned how to trade timing, distance, and silence for survival. Either way, his control over death row, his standing with major networks, and his carefully protected public image make him one of the few untouchable figures left from that generation, at least on the surface. But the whispers keep growing louder. There are claims Diddy has been speaking privately with journalists, teasing other names, teasing other targets, and if he ever gains leverage through appeals. If he ever tries to negotiate, this saga could reignite overnight, especially if he hints at anyone tied to Snoop's inner circle. At the same time, Shante's memoir, Paid the Cost to Be the Boss Lady, remains a looming presence over the narrative. No one knows how directly it will address the rumors or any Diddy connection, but in a story like this, timing always looks strategic. A carefully worded chapter could either cool the speculation or feed it without saying much at all. Meanwhile, insiders warn that this is bigger than one case, that other files exist, that other names exist, that other chapters could be building. One former label executive framed it in the bluntest way possible. If he helped them once, he can help them again, and everyone knows it. And whether that is true or not, fear alone reshapes relationships. Artists distance themselves quietly. Camps split without announcements. Invitations stop arriving. Nobody wants to be too close when the next headline hits, because the broader implications are staggering. This is not just revenge versus punishment. It is the possibility of a reckoning across the hip-hop establishment itself. A generation that once ruled through swagger and secrecy now faces an era where private behavior does not stay buried the way it used to. And at the center of the story, people keep telling Snoop Dogg and Shante Broadus stand like twin pillars, one of legacy, one of loyalty, both carrying knowledge that could shake the foundation of the culture they helped build. Still, too many questions linger. Did Snoop push Diddy's downfall to protect Shante or to secure his empire? Was Shante the betrayed partner or the silent engineer of a plan that kept the Broadus name clean while someone else took the fall? Could Suge Knight's accusations about death row be linked to the same network of influence people believe toppled Diddy? And if Snoop ever did give authorities what they needed once, who might he turn on next if the pressure ever shifts toward him? In a world built on fame and secrecy, power is never permanent. It only changes hands. And this story does not feel finished. There may be messages that never surface, testimonies still sealed, voices still afraid to speak. Diddy's conviction may have closed one chapter, but the book is still wide open. So, here's the real question. When the next wave of information drops, will Snoop still be framed as a survivor who played it smart? Or will he become the next name people cannot stop saying out loud? Drop your thoughts in the comments because in this game, loyalty is currency, and somebody is always about to run out. Until next time, stay watching because this storm is far from over.